Julian Thorne leaned back in the Italian leather chair, his voice a cold, smug drawl announcing that the new amendment was being filed this afternoon. He was not merely triumphant, he was bored with the certainty of his victory. The 50% stake is gone. Ava, he stated, calling it a legal necessity. He expected tears, rage, or begging. He expected his adopted sister to collapse under the pressure of the legal binder lying on the mahogany table. Ava maintained a profound, chilling stillness. She experienced a surge of cold contempt, internally noting that Julian truly believed the volume of the paper meant the weight of the law, and that he had never bothered to read the footnotes. Julian, thinking he needed her to break, demanded to know if she was even listening. She replied that she was listening to every word, her voice flat, offering no justification for her presence. He confirmed that his authority as the executor was absolute and that the legal filing would become active the moment of receipt. Go on, Ava urged him internally. Sign it. File it. Activate the trap. The moment the corporate counsel, Leland Vance, reached for the signature line, Ava executed her move. She slid a single, aged, brittle piece of paper across the massive, polished table. It was the 1982 codicil. Julian instantly dismissed the paper, scoffing that it was historical garbage. He told Leland not to indulge her childish theatrics. Leland, however, gasped, recognizing the archaic legal language and the official seal. Ava had spent 10 years tracing the trust's lineage, not looking for cash, but for the structural flaw built by their father. She noted Julian was too lazy and arrogant to look in the unindexed archives. Leland stammered that the document was a non-rescindable protective covenant, contingent on the trust's liquid assets crossing the $30 million threshold at the moment of any proposed amendment filing. Ava spoke then, sealing the strategic destruction. She confirmed that Julian's motion was the proposed amendment filing, and that his act of filing confirmed the condition had been met. Therefore, the original, protective terms, including the one that instantly transferred the executor role to the remaining primary beneficiary, were now active. Julian surged forward, his initial confusion turning to pure, adrenaline-fueled panic. His own weapon had just fired directly back at him, and the strategic battle was over. Julian's face was no longer merely arrogant, it was a mask of furious, absolute betrayal. He lunged across the conference table, knocking over a crystal water carafe that shattered on the plush carpet. He shrieked at Leland Vance, the corporate counsel, calling the paper a forgery and demanding the filing continue. He was fighting reality, unable to conceive that a scrap of paper he had casually dismissed for years held more power than his entire family name. Leland scrambled away from Julian's sudden, narcissistic rage, confirming that the codicil was legitimate, recorded, and that destroying the document was a legal offense. He looked to Ava for help, but she offered only her cold silence. He's in the denial phase, Ava observed internally, her analysis detached and clinical. He thought authority was a title, a birthright. I knew it was a mechanism, and I just threw the clutch. She quietly stated that Julian's attempted filing, an attempt to amend irrevocable terms, legally proved his malfeasance and violation of his fiduciary duty. Leland, desperate to save himself and his firm, pulled out his phone, confirming to Julian that the transfer was effective now. Julian was financially neutralized and legally stripped of his power. The core destruction was complete. Ava rose slowly, moving toward the massive window, She savored the silence, noting that this was the years of silent preparation culminating not in a brawl, but in a quiet, systemic collapse. Julian stopped shouting, the panic in his voice turning into a desperate plea. He whispered, asking where he was supposed to go. Ava turned back to him, her expression unchanging, her arms crossed in a gesture of absolute finality. She stated that as the new executor, and given his fraudulent attempt against the trust, she was protecting the assets. She informed him that all real property, including the house he occupied, was held by the trust. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, she continued, her tone as dry as a legal brief. She confirmed she would notify the security company to deny his keycard access at 7:01 the next morning. Julian stared. The reality of being not just poor, but literally homeless, hitting him. He cried that he had no other liquid assets, that the trust was everything. You lived your life as a parasite, Julian, Ava thought. Your contempt for the tedious work of budgeting has now left you naked. She pressed a button on her phone, instructing the estate manager to ensure the properties were secured and the gate codes changed immediately. She looked at Julian one last time, delivering the final, devastating sentence that cemented the total fallout. She ordered him to start packing, confirming the service of the formal notice that night. She then left the wreckage of the meeting room. His $50 million kingdom was reduced to a 24-hour eviction notice. The clock read 7:07 a.m. Julian was late, driven by pathologically frantic despair. He slammed on the horn as he reached the granite entrance of the estate, punching in the access code that was now useless. The calm, unfamiliar voice from the intercom announced his access was revoked, and all further communication must be directed through the new executor, Ms. Ava Thorne. Julian's face went white. The final, absolute indignity of being blocked by his own gate, by the security system he himself had approved, was a moment of profound internal collapse. He was rootless and exposed. He thought his title was his security. Ava observed internally from the corporate building downtown, watching the live feed. He simply assumed the machine would obey the prince. She watched him try to access his corporate credit card, which she tried to Morse, as the new trustee, had cancelled. The automated voice confirmed the card was suspended. Financial annihilation confirmed. The arrogance of inherited wealth means he never built a personal safety net, Ava noted. His contempt for budgeting has now left him professionally and physically naked. Julian turned from the gate in defeated fury. He couldn't go to a hotel. He couldn't even buy a decent meal. He had to pivot immediately. He drove aimlessly until he found a quiet, nondescript coffee shop, the kind of place he wouldn't be recognized. He contacted the most sensationalist online news site he knew, instantly reverting to the cold actor persona he used so well. He framed the story as a humanitarian crisis, claiming Ava was committing fraud and using his mother's frail health as cover for a hostile takeover. He omitted the fact that he was the former executor. He finished the call, feeling a momentary surge of artificial power. He reassured himself that the public loved a story of an innocent man fighting an evil, manipulative gold digger, and that Ava would have to negotiate. Ava watched the initial news alert flash across her second monitor, a notification she had set up months ago. The headline was crude, accusing her of hostile takeover and elder neglect. She finished her coffee, her expression softening into a faint, utterly cold smile. You were homeless and broke less than an hour ago, Julian. Now, You've tried to weaponize the only thing I care about, our mother's reputation, by using the very lie I predicted you would choose. You just gave me the justification I needed to expose everything. Julian's public lie was confirmed. A direct, panicked response to the humiliation of the eviction. The news story hit the wire by mid-afternoon, luridly featuring a clickbait headline designed to elicit maximum social outrage. Julian felt the temporary satisfaction of a gambler placing a large foolish bet, believing he was attacking Ava's perceived weakness, her reputation. Ava remained in her downtown office, reviewing the article with the detached scrutiny of a proofreader. The lie was exactly what she needed. She knew Julian's psychological template when cornered. He attacked the softest target with the most outrageous lie. The real target of his lie was not her mother's care. It was the trust's financials. Julian had spent decades disguising frivolous expensive vintage cars, failed business ventures as executor expenses. Ava recalled a dinner 7 years ago, when she first challenged him. Julian had been showing off a racing yacht bought with trust money. Then, she had merely suggested the purchase violated the trust's stated mission. Julian had laughed, loud and condescendingly, silencing the table. He asked who she was going to report him to, mocking her little law books, and confirmed that she was only there by decree. Now he was trying to use their mother as a shield. But his reckless use of the trust's principle was his true vulnerability. His lie about elder abuse gave Ava the moral high ground and the legal imperative she required to bring his financial mismanagement into the public domain as a counter-defense. She dictated an instruction to Leland Vance, telling him that the press had run a libelous story and that the most direct defense was to demonstrate Julian's serial acts of financial malfeasance. Leland, now terrified of Ava's cold competence, cautioned that publishing his spending details was a nuclear option that would destroy his reputation entirely. That is the defense. Ava confirmed, her voice utterly devoid of emotion. She demanded that they file a countersuit for slander, and that the supporting documents must include the trust's full financial statements for the last 5 years, detailing all expenditures made by the former executor. She wanted everything public. Julian's public lie was the direct, causal consequence of his eviction and financial cutoff. The legal action she initiated was not a prolonged fight, but a simple, public disclosure. Julian had tried to attack her image. She was attacking his reality. Ava leaned back, folding her hands on the desk. She felt a profound, satisfying stillness. You attacked my honesty, Julian. I am merely opening the vault on your own disastrous history. Julian, focused on the immediate emotional boost of his article, had no idea that he had just signed the warrant for his complete and utter public humiliation. Julian received the court filing Ava's countersuit for slander and the motion for summary judgment by electronic delivery. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. The true weapon was Exhibit C Trust Expenditure Report, 2018 through 2023. The report detailed 5 years of every single expense Julian had disguised as management. Every vintage car, every failed venture in obscure real estate, itemized as trust diversification efforts. The total frivolous expenditure was $9.5 million. Julian's arrogance finally cracked under the weight of documented reality. He raced to the office of the attack dog lawyer he had hired, Mr. Alcott, insisting they stop the publication immediately. Alcott, recognizing Julian as a liability, informed him that he had sued Ava for slander, claiming she was financially incompetent. He explained that she was simply using Julian's own financial history as a defense, pointing out that Julian had opened the vault, not her. Julian watched Alcott, realizing the lawyer was already mentally calculating the non-payment of the bill. He desperately pleaded for an injunction. "You brought a knife to a nuclear war. And you paid me $20,000 for the privilege," Alcott corrected coldly. Julian's utter inability to see the systemic consequences of his own actions was now clear. "He's drowning in his own paper," Ava observed internally, receiving a brief, smug text summary from Leland. His attempt to use the court system to regain his reputation has resulted in the total public destruction of his credibility. Ava recalled a time Julian took sheer, sadistic joy in humiliating her during family gatherings. Then, he would lean across the table and announce that Ava hoped to marry a book. The room would laugh, reinforcing his perceived intellectual superiority. Now the book had just stripped him bare. The lawyer told Julian that his firm was terminating all representation immediately. Julian, defeated, staggered out of Alcott's office, realizing the documents were now public record and permanent. His entire social identity was about to be obliterated by a court filing he himself had triggered. Julian received the court filing Ava's countersuit for slander and the motion for summary judgment by electronic delivery. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. The true weapon was Exhibit C Trust Expenditure Report, 2018 through 2023. The report detailed 5 years of every single expense Julian had disguised as management. Every vintage car, every failed venture in obscure real estate, itemized as trust diversification efforts. The total frivolous expenditure was $9.5 million. Julian's arrogance finally cracked under the weight of documented reality. He raced to the office of the attack dog lawyer he had hired, Mr. Alcott, insisting they stop the publication immediately. Alcott, recognizing Julian as a liability, informed him that he had sued Ava for slander, claiming she was financially incompetent. He explained that she was simply using Julian's own financial history as a defense, pointing out that Julian had opened the vault, not her. Julian watched Alcott, realizing the lawyer was already mentally calculating the non-payment of the bill. He desperately pleaded for an injunction. "You brought a knife to a nuclear war. And you paid me $20,000 for the privilege," Alcott corrected coldly. Julian's utter inability to see the systemic consequences of his own actions was now clear. "He's drowning in his own paper," Ava observed internally, receiving a brief, smug text summary from Leland. His attempt to use the court system to regain his reputation has resulted in the total public destruction of his credibility. Ava recalled a time Julian took sheer, sadistic joy in humiliating her during family gatherings. Then, he would lean across the table and announce that Ava hoped to marry a book. The room would laugh, reinforcing his perceived intellectual superiority. Now the book had just stripped him bare. The lawyer told Julian that his firm was terminating all representation immediately. Julian, defeated, staggered out of Alcott's office, realizing the documents were now public record and permanent. His entire social identity was about to be obliterated by a court filing he himself had triggered. Julian received the court filing Ava's countersuit for slander and the motion for summary judgment by electronic delivery. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. The true weapon was Exhibit C Trust Expenditure Report, 2018 through 2023. The report detailed 5 years of every single expense Julian had disguised as management. Every vintage car, every failed venture in obscure real estate, itemized as trust diversification efforts. The total frivolous expenditure was $9.5 million. Julian's arrogance finally cracked under the weight of documented reality. He raced to the office of the attack dog lawyer he had hired, Mr. Alcott, insisting they stop the publication immediately. Alcott, recognizing Julian as a liability, informed him that he had sued Ava for slander, claiming she was financially incompetent. He explained that she was simply using Julian's own financial history as a defense, pointing out that Julian had opened the vault, not her. Julian watched Alcott, realizing the lawyer was already mentally calculating the non-payment of the bill. He desperately pleaded for an injunction. "You brought a knife to a nuclear war, and you paid me $20,000 for the privilege," Alcott corrected coldly. Julian's utter inability to see the systemic consequences of his own actions was now clear. He's drowning in his own paper. Ava observed internally, receiving a brief, smug text summary from Leland. His attempt to use the court system to regain his reputation has resulted in the total public destruction of his credibility. Ava recalled a time Julian took sheer, sadistic joy in humiliating her during family gatherings. Then, he would lean across the table and announce that Ava hoped to marry a book. The room would laugh, reinforcing his perceived intellectual superiority. Now the book had just stripped him bare. The lawyer told Julian that his firm was terminating all representation immediately. Julian, defeated, staggered out of Alcott's office, realizing the documents were now public record and permanent. His entire social identity was about to be obliterated by a court filing he himself had triggered. Julian's isolation was complete. He was operating on the desperate adrenaline of a cornered animal. He crashed a small, private dinner being held for his mother in the secured residence. He burst through the dining room door, disheveled and wild-eyed, performing the role of the victim with manic desperation. "Mother, thank God you're safe. Ava has stolen everything," he cried, rushing to his mother's side. He expected their mother's immediate, unconditional emotional intervention. He believed the maternal bond was the one lever the cold, calculating system could not touch. Ava remained utterly still. She did not raise her voice, did not flinch, and did not interrupt his frantic cascade of lies. Her cold silence was an act of aggressive control, letting the villain exhaust his last reserves. He thinks this is a drama contest, where the loudest player wins the prize of her pity, Ava analyzed internally. He does not understand that I have already removed the emotional component from this calculation. Julian continued, trying to frame the trust takeover as an attempt to protect his mother. As he paused, breathless, Ava quietly pulled out the thin, highly bound document and placed it gently in front of their mother. It was Exhibit C from the failed defamation suit, the full, unredacted trust expenditure report, 2018 through 2023. Ava spoke, her voice quiet and steady. She explained that the legal filings required the disclosure of his expenditures to counter his claims of financial prudence. She pointed out that the report detailed the $9.5 million Julian spent on non-trust-related, frivolous expenditures over 5 years. Their mother picked up the report. Julian had always shielded her from the messy reality, presenting himself as the careful steward. Now, the cold, numerical reality of his betrayal was laid bare. "You said you were just managing it, Julian," the mother whispered, her voice barely audible. This shows you were only managing it for yourself." Julian's psychological destruction was immediate and total. He had lost the financial kingdom, the social identity, and the professional protection. Now, he had lost the one person whose love he relied on to justify his entire existence. Julian recoiled from his mother's expression, staggering backward. The framework of his life, built on the foundation of unquestioned love, had just collapsed into dust. He fled the room, leaving the documented truth behind him. Ava watched the door slam, her expression hardening into a final resolve. He has no allies left. He has only rage. Julian's final, desperate flight set the stage for his predictable, self-destructive criminal act. Julian fled the house, driven by a raw, consuming emotional void. The profound disappointment in his mother's eyes was the final destruction of his identity. He drove aimlessly, his rage fixated not on the money, but on the tangible memory of his father's kindness toward Ava. He remembered a small, granite memorial bench, located on the far edge of the estate property, dedicated to Ava's biological family. He had always resented the bench, seeing it as an obnoxious symbol of his father's misplaced sentimentality. He never should have given her a place here. If I can't control the legacy, I will destroy the memory. This was Julian's final, reckless act of petty tyranny, a desperate attempt to strike at the one thing Ava held purely on sentimental terms. He climbed over a low section of the perimeter wall, pulling a heavy gardening trowel from his pocket, intending to smash the granite plaque. Ava, sitting in her study, felt a strange, chilling sense of calm anticipation. He's going for the monument, she realized, without surprise. He can't hurt me, so he will try to erase the ghost he resents. Years ago, anticipating exactly this kind of emotional sabotage, Ava had quietly taken steps to protect the bench. She had successfully lobbied the local historical society to designate the small memorial and the surrounding oak grove as a minor, privately held historical landmark. This systemic protection, a piece of regulatory paperwork Julian would never have noticed, was her final, invisible fortress. Julian raised the trowel, breathing heavily, the image of his mother's disappointment fueling his final, destructive impulse. Before he could strike, a harsh voice cut through the quiet night. Two local police officers, alerted by a silent, automated system that detected disturbance near the designated landmark boundary, emerged from the dark. Julian dropped the trowel, staring in stunned disbelief. He was caught in the act, red-handed, committing vandalism on a legally protected site. "I am Julian Thorne. This is family property," he protested, his voice hysterical and shrill. "You are trespassing, sire," the officer replied, already moving to cuff him. "And damaging protected municipal property is a criminal offense, regardless of who owns the surrounding land. The memorial bench is a designated landmark. I am Julian Thorne. This is family property," he protested, his voice hysterical and shrill. Ava received a short, dry text message from her security contact. Suspect apprehended near Site B. Vandalism protocol confirmed. Local police have custody. She looked at the message, then out her office window at the silent city skyline. The entire complex annihilation, financial, social, emotional, and now criminal, was complete. Executed purely by the laws and systems Julian had been too arrogant to study and too entitled to respect. His final, reckless act had resulted in his permanent removal from the entire game. The final scene was one of quiet, administrative finality. Julian was gone, held indefinitely on charges of trespassing and vandalism of a protected landmark, a consequence of his final, ego-driven rage. Ava Thorne sat in the stately office of her corporate counsel, Leland Vance. The room was calm, clean, and silent, a stark contrast to the shattered chaos Julian had left behind. Ava was signing the last documents required to restructure the Thorne family trust, Leland slid the newly embossed official trust indenture across the desk, confirming the probate court had officially recognized the irrevocable transfer of the executor role. He added that any future challenge was legally moot, given Julian's multiple breaches of fiduciary duty and the criminal charge. Ava looked out the window at the distant, sparkling skyline of the financial district. She remembered the sheer, consuming contempt Julian had shown her on that day a decade ago. Then, he had stood at this very window, dismissing her adopted status, confirming she was a temporary fixture. Now she was the architect. She turned her attention back to the final article of the new trust indenture, the section dedicated to the disposal of Julian's 0% share. We need to execute the final clause of Article 5. Subsection C. Ava stated, her voice quiet but carrying the authority of established wealth. The portion of the trust's capital previously designated for Julian Thorne's benefit will be immediately allocated to a new irrevocable, charitable foundation. Leland nodded. And the name of the foundation? Ms. Thorne. Ava leaned forward, her eyes catching the light with a faint, utterly cold sheen of satisfaction. The name will be the Adoption and Legal Systemic Reform Foundation. She dictated, slowly and deliberately. Its mission will be to fund legal education for underserved youth and to advocate for the protection of familial assets held by non-biological heirs. Leland's pen scratched against the paper. He understood the chilling significance of the name. Ava was using the structure of the trust Julian's most sacred symbol to enshrine the very legal and social concepts Julian had spent his life, mocking adopted rights and the triumph of intellect over birthright. The legacy destruction was absolute. Julian's name would not only be absent from the family fortune, but the very wealth he forfeited would be used to build a foundation that celebrated his primary source of contempt. Ava rose from the desk. She felt the heavy, satisfying weight of control. Julian's punishment was the total and permanent reversal of reality. He was left with nothing but the memory of the immense power he had possessed, and the knowledge that he himself, through his own blinding arrogance, had willingly triggered his annihilation by ignoring a single, dusty legal document. She walked to the door, leaving Leland alone with the signed documents and the silence. The game was over, and the victor felt only the cold, clear satisfaction of a mechanism efficiently executed.